Hi everyone, I'm Any New Province, and this week we're going to find out if Barrier of Bones is possibly Pauper Playable. Barrier of Bones is a brand new common from Guilds of Ravnica, and it highlights one of the new mechanics that came with that set called Surveil. Barrier of Bones costs 1 black mana for a 0/3 skeleton wall with Defender, and when it enters the battlefield you get to surveil 1, which means you look at the top card of your library, you may put that card into your graveyard. Surveil is strictly better, and I use that phrase sparingly, it's a strictly better scry. That's because you get to put the card from the top of your library into the graveyard instead of the bottom of your library, and there are a lot of things you can do with cards in your graveyard. Today's deck that highlights Barrier of Bones' ability to put cards into your graveyard comes to us from HeWhoIsInTheWater. Most enfranchised Pauper players already know who this player is from seeing their name in 5.0 list results from Magic the Gathering online leads or seeing them place well in the weekly Pauper challenges. So for all those reasons, I can't wait to try out what HeWhoIsInTheWater has decided to do with Barrier of Bones. They built this deck, a deck that I'm calling Bone Angler. Before I get into the deck tech, I just want to let you know that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Alright, let's get into Bone Angler. First, I want to talk about some of the awesome graveyard synergies included in this deck that really highlight the power of Surveil over Scry. First, we have Gurmag Angler, Gurm Daddy. Gurmag Angler costs 6 and a black for a 5/5 zombie fish with Delve, which means each card you exile from your graveyard while casting this spell pays for 1 generic mana. There are tons of decks that plan on closing the game out with Gurmag Angler. It's a huge creature, a 5/5, that a lot of decks can cheat down early by dumping cards into their graveyard. The way our deck is going to achieve this is with early Barrier of Bones. Next, we have Unwavering Initiate, which I think is an awesome inclusion. It costs 2 and a white for a 3/2 human warrior with Vigilance, which is a pretty good rate on its own. What makes Unwavering Initiate even better and very synergistic with Surveil is its Embalm ability, which means you can pay 4 and a white to exile Unwavering Initiate from your graveyard to create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a white zombie human warrior with no mana cost. You can only do this as a sorcery. Unwavering Initiate coming back out of your graveyard after your opponent has already used a removal spell on it is an awesome way to grind against certain decks, but also if this is just in our graveyard from the Surveil ability, its Embalm cost isn't so high and restrictive that we won't use it to just get a 3/2 Vigilance on the battlefield. Finally, we're running the full 4 copies of Unearth, which costs 1 black mana for a sorcery that returns target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Besides Gurmag Angler, all of our creatures cost 3 or less mana, meaning Unearth is going to be able to get any one of them back out onto the battlefield for another go. This is great because a lot of the card advantage in our deck is actually tied to creatures' bodies, so not only does Unearth replace the creature's body on the battlefield, it also gives us another useful enter the battlefield effect. We're definitely going to want to double trigger effects like the one on the body of the first piece of our card advantage package. That is Phyrexian Rager. Phyrexian Rager costs 2 and a black for a 2/2 horror, and when it enters the battlefield you draw a card and you lose 1 life. This is how black generates card advantage, usually at the cost of a point or 2 of your life total, which isn't a big deal for our deck because another one of our threats is one of the best life gaining attackers in the Pauper format. Speaking of losing life to draw cards, we're also running 3 copies of Night's Whisper, just pure card advantage. It costs 1 and a black for a sorcery that allows you to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Our last card advantage creature is Thraben Inspector. It costs 1 white mana for a 1/2, and when it enters the battlefield you investigate, which means you create a colorless clue artifact token that says pay 2, sacrifice this artifact, draw a card. Thraben Inspector is good enough on its front side that people will often refer to this card as the White Pauper Muldrifter. However, we're going to try to trigger its enter the battlefield effect multiple times with Unearth and this next spell, Core Skyfisher. Core Skyfisher costs 1 and a white for a 2/3 flyer, and when it enters the battlefield you return a permanent you control to its owner's hand. I'm really interested to see how Barrier of Bones stacks up against other Core Skyfisher recursion targets like Prophetic Prism. It doesn't draw you a card when it enters the battlefield, but it almost does, and it leaves behind a body for blocking. Our last attacker is Seeker of the Way. It costs 1 and a white for a 2/2 with Prowess, which means whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Seeker of of the Way gets +1/+1 until end of turn, but what makes it even better is whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Seeker of the Way gains lifelink until end of turn. We're going to be playing a fairly long game with our core Skyfishers and Thraben Inspectors, so Seeker of the Way being able to grow and punch through a clogged board is critical. The life gain is going to matter in those long games as well, even if it's not against something like Burn. A few extra life points may give us enough time to start steamrolling enough value that our opponent can't stop us. Our last package is a bunch of interaction. If you're going to be winning the game by attacking with a somewhat slow deck, you have to make sure your opponent's board is clear enough that they can't kill you on the crackback. First, we have 4 copies of Diabolic Edict, which costs 1 and a black for an instant that causes target player to sacrifice a creature. It's a little hard to hit the ceiling of value on Diabolic Edict, but it is one of the best edicts for that. You can cast it at instant speed while your opponent is trying to rancor up their only creature. What a blowout. We're also running 4 copies of Dead Weight. He Who Is in the Water said that the ceiling on this card is just a lot higher than cards like Disfigure, because you can even put it on your own Barrier of Bones and recur it with core Skyfisher for a bit of added Seeker of the Way value. Also, it fights Tireless Tribe a lot better because they can't just keep pumping its toughness time and time again to get out of range of Dead Weight's -2/-2. Our last non-land card is 2 copies of Unmake. It costs 3 hybrid Orzhov mana and exiles target creature at instant speed. It's awesome to be able to exile a creature completely unconditionally. Unmake is a little bit better than Journey to Nowhere for that reason. Your opponent might be able to buy their creature back out from under your enchantment, but with Unmake, if it resolves, you're dealing with that creature for good. Alright, let's have a look at this mana base. First, we have 3 copies of Ash Barrens for fixing our mana whenever we have an extra mana lying around and an Ash Barrens in hand. We have 2 copies of Bajuka Bog. It's always awesome to have some main deck graveyard hate, and we're running 4 copies of Scoured Barrens. They enter the battlefield tapped. When they enter the battlefield, they gain you a life, and when they're untapped, you can tap them for black or white. For our basic lands, we're running 4 plains and 7 swamps. Even though this is a little bit of a slower deck with a lot of recursive value, we have enough basic lands that we can get out of the gate fast enough to beat those especially slow decks like Tron. Alright, let's have a look at this sideboard. First, we have 2 copies of Standard Bearer for picking up all of our opponent's pump spells and enchantments. We have 2 copies of Prismatic Strands for fogging when our opponent's going all in on a single attack. We have 2 copies of Nihil Spellbomb for a little bit of added graveyard hate. 2 copies of Invoke the Divine. This is for killing a Mirror Enforcer while getting you out of fling range. We have 2 copies of Okiba Gang Shinobi because some decks need a critical mass of cards in hand to win the game. We have 2 copies of Snuff Out, just a hyper efficient removal spell that comes out of nowhere, and 3 copies of Crypt Rats for Unearthable Wraths. And there you have it, Bone Angler by He Who Is in the Water. We're going to take this deck into a league at twitch.tv/AnyNewProvince this Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Atlantic time. We're there every Tuesday night playing Possibly Pauper Playable decks. Before I go, I just want to remind you that you can like the video or subscribe to the channel down below. I'd seriously appreciate it. It's a great way to let me know you've enjoyed everything, and it really encourages me to keep making great Pauper content. Thank you so much for submitting this deck, He Was in the Water, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this deck tech, and hopefully I'll see you on Tuesday night.